Welcome on the cosmic atom when God covers you. He is not protecting you. It is a preparation for an explosion. Your opponents will not survive. Allow that to marinate. Imagine this. Every 13 seconds, someone in the world is the target of a clandestine spiritual conspiracy. Not because they did anything wrong, but because their light did the right thing and selected one. You were one of them. You weren't just hated. You were being hunted. This wasn't about petty jealousy or family drama. Nah, it was spiritual warfare disguised as dinner table talk. Betrayal, dressed as both romantic interest and sabotage. Wearing your cousin's perfume. You did not simply avoid a bullet. God made sure that the sniper's gun jammed. And let's be honest, if God hadn't intervened, you wouldn't be viewing this film right now. You'd be on some old YouTube conspiracy documentary about a bizarre disappearance that no one could explain. But guess what? You're still alive, breathing, and glowing like a heavenly fault in Hell's Matrix. So have a seat, because what you're going to hear isn't just tea. It's spiritual insight into the filthy, wicked conspiracy to eliminate you. And why did heaven say, not this one? And don't worry, I'll reveal the snakes without naming them, unless the shoe fits. Let's get to it. Number one, you were never the intended target. Your light was. They never really disliked you. What they despised was the brightness that existed within you. That divine light, that inner clarity, that inexplicable strength you maintained even when life smacked you hard. This is what made you a menace. They couldn't even explain it to themselves. They simply felt compelled to manipulate, sabotage, and ridicule you. But deep down, they understood you held something unique, something they couldn't replicate, buy, or murder. You walked into rooms and changed the ambience without trying. That was not ego. That was a source of energy. They sensed it. You didn't need a title, a platform, or an audience. Your mere presence exposed what was fake around you. When people are living in lies, the truth is unwelcome. It is risky. That's why you were constantly misunderstood, targeted, and discussed behind your back. It wasn't because you were noisy or disrespectful. It was because your soul disclosed information they wished to keep secret. They smiled at you, but behind closed doors, they treated you like a threat report. You thought you were developing friendships. They were developing strategies. You thought they wanted to grow alongside you. They were covertly attempting to bury you. However, it was not as personal as you may believe. It was spiritual. These folks were reacting to your anointing, and many of them were unaware of it. Their soul recognized you and terrified. You did not come into their lives to compete. You came to transform. But transformation necessitates truth, and truth reveals what is damaged. So instead of dealing with their own darkness, they attempted to dampen your light. Here's where things get wild. You continue to try to love them despite this. You granted them grace. You occupied space. Regardless of how good or devoted you were, they continue to target you. Not because you did anything wrong, but because your mere existence tested their comfort zones. The attacks were not proof. You were weak. They confirmed that you were authentic. You were the mirror. That did not lie. When people are unable to accept their own reflection, they attempt to break the mirror. But no matter how hard they tried, God wouldn't let them break you because He knew you weren't the problem. You were the prophecy. Number two, they didn't simply want to hurt you. They intended to rewire you. They didn't simply wish to hurt you. That would have been too easy. What they actually wanted was to reprogram you, shatter your spirit, twist your mind, and make you doubt yourself so much that you'd start walking around with your head down, questioning your value, memory, voice, and even reality. This wasn't simply about emotional trauma. This was a full-fledged attempt to obliterate your basic identity and replace it with something more manageable. That is why their techniques were not always loud and forceful. Sometimes they were subtle and calculated. One day, it was a sarcastic remark. The following day, passive-aggressive quiet. Next came the guilt trips, emotional disengagement, and gaslighting. They intended to change your internal code by making you believe you were the problem. That is how deep it went. If they could persuade you to doubt your own thoughts, they wouldn't have to raise a finger to silence your voice. You'd make yourself silent. They realized you had insight, power, and purpose, but instead of nurturing it, they attempted to drown it. Because if you ever really embraced who you were meant to be, they would be exposed for who they were not. They chipped away at you, one comment, manipulation, and treachery at a time. Not enough to provoke suspicion, but just enough to make you feel uneasy, just enough to shake the foundation. They sought to transform you into a shell of yourself, submissive, weary, bewildered, and little. Despite all of this, you continued to wake awake. You kept asking and arguing, even when you didn't have the words to express what was happening. Your spirit knew, and that is what saved you. God intervened because he understood they weren't simply harming you. They were attempting to recreate you into their image. And he replied no. He preserved your mind from lasting injury, because losing one's identity turns you into a puppet. And that's exactly what the adversary desired. A powerful soul without a feeling of self. But God protected your circuitry. Every portion they attempted to twist. He adjusted his posture. You didn't simply survive abuse. You escaped a malevolent system that sought to override your destiny. That's the type of miracle that people ignore. But heaven recorded it. Number 3, your death would have been ritualistic, not tragic. They didn't only want to hurt you. They planned to make your downfall a spectacle. This was neither an emotional outburst or a random act of brutality. No, they wanted your devastation to be seen, discussed, and used as proof that you were never who you claimed to be. They wanted you to have a public breakdown so they could say, "See, I told you they weren't special." Your anguish wasn't merely going to be their reward. It was going to be their validation. This wasn't supposed to be a tranquil fall. They wanted a big crash. They wanted you to be psychologically shattered, emotionally bankrupt, spiritually disconnected, and preferably involved in a chaotic issue that would have spread throughout your circle. It was intended. Some intended to isolate you and then blame you for being distant. They aimed to drive you to depression and then label you unstable. Some others even hoped you would lose everything, your tranquility, name, and reputation, so they may feel superior while standing over your devastation. What they didn't expect was for God to interrupt the entire show. They had their stage set up, their words rehearsed, and their faux worry prepared, but they hadn't shut down the entire operation. You did not fall in the way they intended. Even when you stumbled, it didn't appear like defeat. It looked like a transformation. The exact breakdown they were expecting turned into a breakthrough that no one saw coming. They were banking on a version of you who had no idea who you were. The version that still wanted acceptance, desired love, and provided opportunities to people who only caused you grief. But they missed the anguish, created a new version of you, one that they couldn't modify or control. God didn't simply rescue you from them. He saved you from needing them. If they had succeeded, your name would have been spoken in sympathy and disgust. But God changed the script. Now you're the one rising softly and fiercely. And every time they see you still standing, glowing, and selected, they feel something because they know your destruction was not withheld for no reason. It was postponed so that your ascent might be viewed by the people who organized your funeral. Number 4, they hired individuals to be your handlers, not buddies. Some of the people you believed were your most trusted allies were never meant to love you. They were tasked with keeping an eye on you. Some appeared to be friends, lovers, or even family members when they entered your life. But they were merely performing parts. Roles are designed to manipulate, distract, and divert you from your intended course. They were not sent from God. They were purposefully placed by something darker, something that saw your potential before you even did. These individuals did not come to help you build. They came to observe you. They focused on your routines, patterns, and weaknesses. They took mental notes while you were vulnerable. They observed how you dealt with stress, who you confided in, and how you processed pain. They listened not to help you, but to acquire information. Every time you attempted to open up, they twisted your words. Later, every time you let them in, they discreetly warned you not to set unrealistic goals. Don't dream too loudly. Do not overestimate your own abilities. It was psychological warfare in slow motion. The most hazardous element is that you trusted them. That's why it worked for so long. They won your confidence so that they could monitor your progress. Anytime you tried to advance, they drag you back with guilt, drama, distractions, and phony support that always had strings attached. You weren't simply being gaslit. You were being managed. But what they didn't expect was your soul's awakening. Despite their attempts to clip your wings, your spirit continued to escape the cage. You have ceased explaining yourself. You stopped shrinking. You began questioning the patterns. That's when their behavior began to glitch. They couldn't keep you in the mental loop any longer. You become too conscious to be managed, aligned, or played. That's when their true goal became clear. Some left abruptly. Some became cold. Some people reacted aggressively. Because when a handler discovers you are no longer under their control, they panic. Their power works only when you are unaware of your own. But now you do. And this scares them since it indicates you're no longer surrounded by disguised allies. You're surrounded by exposed remnants of a system that failed to shatter you. Number 5. The plot was intergenerational. You were the first to break the curse. This struggle did not begin with you. It landed on you. What? You've been coping with more than just a run of bad luck or unexpected adversity. This was a deep-rooted generational agenda. A quiet disease flowing through your DNA is a cycle of dysfunction, secrecy, trauma, and spiritual bonding. And you were the first person who did not look away. The first one to question it. The first person to say, "This ends with me." You did not simply break habits. You destroyed centuries of programming. You exposed the lies that your family made normal. You raised concerns about behavior that had previously been ignored. You experienced abuse that others denied. You spoke the truth that your forefathers were too terrified to express. That made you dangerous not only to individuals, but also to principalities. Because, let's be honest, this wasn't only about your emotional strength. This was spiritual battle. They came for you so hard because your awakening was a form of spiritual revolt. You were not supposed to wake up. You were not expected to find your voice. You were meant to repeat the same patterns and experience the same anguish. Raise the next generation through the same quiet trauma. But you didn't. You chose clarity over comfort, healing over concealment, and purpose over pretending your decision harmed something ancient. That's why it seemed like everything in your life fell apart the moment you began mending. That's why people turned against you. This is why the pressure got unbearable. You were not simply changing your life. You were upsetting a spiritual economy that benefited from your family's turmoil. When you stopped performing the role that they expected of you, the entire system collapsed. You were not a threat. You were a codebreaker. Your existence jeopardized their system. Your clarity dispelled their misunderstanding. And the minute you decided to live in truth, you ended a generation-long darkness. That's why it seemed like war. Because it was won, but you didn't simply survive it. You won silently, boldly, and now the curse has been broken, and the heritage is brand new. Number 6, God allowed you to see the ugly, so you wouldn't romanticize evil again. God did not sugarcoat the process for you. He did not. Quick and gentle lectures or polite warnings. He allowed you to see the ugly side of evil up close, because anything less would have broken the illusion. You did not merely get hurt. You were inducted into reality. The mask was taken off, revealing how deliberate cold, and unapologetic darkness can be. It did not simply knock on your door. It sat at your table, smiled at you, and then stabbed you with a knife. You delivered it. You needed to feel the weight of betrayal in your bones. You had to sit in rooms where love was fabricated, but the manipulation was real. You had to trust people, and then they used that trust to sabotage you. That amount of suffering was not punishment. It was clarity. God allowed it to happen, not because he abandoned you, but because he knew your discernment might one day save someone else's life. He let you walk into the flames because he knew if you didn't understand how evil works, you'd always be vulnerable to it. Dressed up with charm, charisma, or good intentions, you had to face the sting of betrayal, not for vengeance or lessons, but to strengthen your spirit. Because many of the most harmful persons in your life lacked warning indicators. They arrived with compliments. You no longer mistake attention for fondness. You no longer confuse access and loyalty. You have learned to read energy rather than just words. You've lived long enough to quit rationalizing away red signals. What happens if you disregard them? You don't romanticize lies or toxicity anymore because you've suffered from them. This type of awakening does not come from books or sermons. It stems from traveling through hell with your eyes wide open. And it is what God allowed, not to break you, but to strengthen your spiritual defense system so that no manipulation can ever penetrate again. You're no longer naive. You're dangerous now in the best possible manner. Because once you see the devil without his mask, he will never deceive you again. Number 7, your silence was not ignored. It had been militarized in the spirit. Your silence was not weakness. It was not defeat. It wasn't confusion. It was a wonderful strategy. While they whispered, plotted, and acted, you went silent. Not because you didn't have anything to say, but because God guided you into a hallowed season in which words would have been ineffective. They assumed you were quiet because they had won, that you were shattered, and that you had finally accepted whatever small box they stuffed you into. What they didn't realize was that God was creating something atomic inside of you. You were not inactive. You were in a spiritual laboratory in complete silence. You were discarding false identities, severing social bonds, unlearning generational lies, and receiving heavenly guidance. From the outside, it appeared to be still, yet within it was a full-fledged war room. You were being rewired. Your discernment was improving. Your spirit was being educated to discern frequencies that human ears cannot perceive. That's why your quiet was misinterpreted. It was not silent. It was hallowed noise in the spirit world. They kept pushing, harassing, and trying to elicit a response. They intended to draw you into drama, make you defend yourself, and entice you into breakdowns, but your silence irritated them. It was spiritual, static confirmation that their approaches were no longer working. And the hush, it became a weapon. Every day, you did not respond, did not fold, they did not explain. Power was increasing. You were being loaded as a spiritual rocket. They misunderstood your pause for paralysis. They assumed you were out of moves, but they didn't aware you weren't in checkmate. You were preparing, and now the unexpected comeback has begun. The brightness, clarity, and authority in your voice. The doors opened without their permission. Everything is occurring right now, and it is blinding them. Because when God decides to relaunch someone who has passed through the fire in silence, the resulting explosion is not only loud, but also unstoppable. So leave them wondering how you accomplished it. You will not need to explain. Your assent will be the loudest answer they have ever heard. Number 8, they attempted to put their karma onto you. This was not just manipulation. It was spiritual deception at its most twisted. They knew exactly what they had done. Betrayal, falsehoods, and generational curses. They refused to heal. Instead of accepting responsibility, they attempted to pin it on you. They wanted to seem as the victim while covertly playing the villain. So they twisted narratives, emphasized your shortcomings, pretended to be innocent in public, and secretly hoped that you'd take the brunt of their karma. This was a secret attempt to take over spiritual lore. They believed that if they projected their guilt onto you for long enough, through shame, gossip, blame, or emotional abuse, heaven would believe the illusion and deal with you rather than them. It wasn't only toxic, it was calculated. They were fully aware of their wrongdoing. They knew they were the ones spreading havoc. But since you had a pure heart and an open spirit, they used your light as a scapegoat, believing it would take the brunt of their darkness. What? They didn't expect supernatural discernment. God is not misled by theatrics. He does not make judgments based on who talks the most, screams the loudest, or claims to be the nicest. God read the energy signature. He traced the discomfort back to its source. When the truth finally struck the air, it triggered a spiritual turnaround so severe that they couldn't escape it. Everything they tried to throw at you is now circling back with precision, not because you desired harm, but because heavenly justice does not ignore tears. They mocked the uncertainty. They generated the isolation they intended. It's all hitting home for them, and not quietly or publicly. The stories they told about you are unraveling in front of the same people they attempted to deceive. They're stuck because the traps they've placed are closing in. God shielded you from not just the attack, but also from a fake identity they attempted to plant on your soul. He kept your name pure in locations where your voice was not heard. And now you can stroll freely. Not just them, but also the spiritual retribution they attempted to hand you. That is not luck. That is divine reversal. Number 9, you were supposed to self-destruct publicly. They bet on it. They were not simply waiting for your failure. They were designing it. Some of them observed you with the same enthusiasm. A throng gathers around a structure that is going to fall. They didn't simply want you gone. They wanted your destruction to be magnificent. They expected your breakdown to take place in public. They wanted your suffering to last forever. And most importantly, they wanted you to be arrested, hospitalized, and caught up in a scandal that was raging on the streets and online. They envisioned your downfall becoming viral. This is why they pushed you so hard. Why did they talk lies behind your back, create mayhem around your name, and poke at your most sensitive wounds? It wasn't arbitrary cruelty. This was a stage performance. And you were the major character they expected to fail miserably. They believed that if they could apply just enough emotional, mental, and spiritual pressure, you would eventually snap. And when you did, they'd sit back, sip their bitterness, and remark, "See, I told you they were unstable." But God interrupted the entire production. He did more than simply protect your intellect. He deconstructed the story. The scenes they wrote never became a reality. The baseless charges were never upheld. The breakdown never occurred. The public shame never occurred. The multitude who had gathered to watch your failure saw nothing because heaven blurred the cameras and deleted the script. You did not break down. You burst out while they were watching. You were healing while they wagered on your downfall. You were receiving instructions. God kept your moves concealed, your agony holy, and your rescue quiet until it was time to reappear, stronger than they could have dreamed. You did not simply endure what they threw at you. You avoided an annihilation created specifically for your soul. And now you are the plot twist. Your entire existence reveals their lies. The same mouth that predicted your failure must now choke on the truth. You did not just win. You escaped the fall. They sought to justify their hatred. That is divine sabotage. That is why you're still standing. Number 10, you were never the black sheep. You were the bloodline disruptor. They referred to you as the black sheep, as if it were a fault, as if you were defective. It seemed as if there was something wrong with you since you didn't fit into their dysfunction. But the truth is that you were never the problem. You were the proof that there was an issue. You saw through the quiet to the secrets and false standards. You asked the questions. Nobody dared to. You broke the rules that were never correct to begin with. Because of this, they labeled you. They were unable to control you. So they threw you out. They couldn't shame you into submitting. So you became the scapegoat in families, churches, workplaces, and social groups. You were frequently the one left out, misunderstood, and misrepresented. But it wasn't a rejection. It was a divine separation. God delivered you from systems that would have gobbled you whole. He was not punishing you, but rather preserving you. You were the one asked to disrupt the pattern, the one who saw through the spiritual fog while others continued the same generational cycles. Abuse, denial, manipulation, and spiritual compromise. You were over here, disturbing everything just by being honest. They didn't dislike you because you were incorrect. They despised you because you were correct, and they weren't prepared to confront it. God didn't enable you to blend in because you weren't supposed to. You are not a match for the lies that your bloodline has normalized. You were never meant to be just another echo in a room filled with generational stillness. You were asked to be the rupture, the recalibration, the restart. That is why the attacks were so personal, relentless, and hurtful. Because spiritual systems maintain their cycles, and your very presence endangered the plan. You were not the black sheep. You were the exit strategy. And now that you've stopped apologizing for being different, God is exposing how important your presence truly was. You did not betray them. You prevented the future from being a carbon copy of the past. As a result, every curse they attempted to keep alive through your silence is now collapsing beneath the weight of your truth. Number 11. The plot was legitimate in spirit until you became conscious. This wasn't simply a run of poor luck or family dysfunction. What was happening to you was based on spiritual documents, generational contracts, some expressed and some unspoken, were negotiated long before you arrived. Agreements were reached in silence. In trauma, ritual, and denial. Abuse was tolerable. Betrayal was pardoned. Abandoned. It was normalized. And because no one objected, it became legally enforceable in its spirit. It was as if darkness had claimed your bloodline, and no one questioned who had the title before you. You began asking the questions that no one dared to ask. You began telling the truth. Everyone swore to defend. You pointed out dysfunction that others consider tradition, and without knowing it, your enlightenment caused a legal upheaval in the spiritual sphere. Consciousness is important in paradise. The moment you were one with heavenly truth, when you said, "No more," even through tears, you rejected the generational terms. The enemy had been active for centuries. The enemy had legal access to harm your family because everyone before you had agreed to the lies. They tolerated, survived, and passed it on. But you shattered the stillness and refused to carry what wasn't yours. Something ancient snapped. That's when all hell broke loose. Not because you were weak, but because you were correct. Your spirit rejected what your bloodline had accepted. You rejected the cycle. In doing so, you deprived the opponent of his permission. The traps that your parents, grandparents, and siblings fell into no longer apply to you. The manipulation fails to land. The shame does not stick. The generational burden starts to lift. Not because you're superior, but because you're alert. That's why the strain increased the instant you began recovering, because you weren't simply changing your life. You were rewriting the spiritual contract. You grabbed the pen from the enemy and returned it to God. And now every curse, falsehood, and poisoned agreement that formerly dominated your family is being overturned. The enemy, it no longer has legal standing. You are not merely free. You have lawfully removed darkness from your lineage. Number 12, your pain was not a side effect. It was proof of purpose. Your discomfort was not an unanticipated result or background noise. It was central to your call. Every betrayal, grief, and breakdown was built into the building. The ones who attempted to harm you believed they were doing permanent damage, but they had no idea that agony in God's hands becomes a blueprint. They feared the pressure would crush you, but it instead carved out the depth and dimension of your purpose. They weren't simply harming you. They were inadvertently contributing to your spiritual construction. See, when your chosen God does not design your life around comfort, He bases it on the truth. Nothing shows the truth like agony. It reveals erroneous attachments. It exposes concealed lies. It teaches discernment as no book ever could. Pain became your training ground rather than your last resting place. You learned how to recognize manipulation, how to hear God through the chaos, and how to sit still in storms designed to knock you out. That is not a side effect. That is spiritual formation. They attempted to weaponize your trauma, sadness, and isolation. They assumed that if they threw enough at you, you'd eventually shatter and remain shattered. But all they did was provide the basic materials God used to fortify you. What they regarded as your weakness has now evolved into your most acute wisdom. What they laughed at has become your language for connecting with others. What they attempted to suppress is now the thunder that echoes your voice. They believed that anguish would cripple your purpose. Instead, it activated it. You did not simply walk through fire. You learned to carry it. You now speak with an authority that comes from experience. And when you open your mouth, it does not simply echo. It delivers. That is what worries them right now. The tools that were used to bury you are now in your hands, refined into magnificent weapons. Your scars are not simply reminders. These are credentials. They demonstrate that your purpose was not handed to you. It was forged. Because of this, you carry more than simply knowledge. You possess spiritual firepower. You were never a victim. You were the vessel. And now the anguish they sought to use against you speaks louder than any lie they've ever spoken. Number 13, they were soaking up your energy while claiming to love you. They didn't love you. They were eating on you. You were the wellspring of energy, warmth, and emotion that lit up everything around you. You brought light into dark spaces, clarity into confusion and mending, and shattered dynamics. However, what you thought was a mutual relationship was actually a one-way siphon. They were not flooding into you. They were draining you. They praised your strength because it helped their weakness. They applauded your happiness when they needed a refill. They relied on your wisdom, borrowed your quiet, and absorbed your calm, but they never asked how you were doing. And when you began to fade, they did not rush to restore you. They scattered, looking for someone else to leech from. It was a parasitical trade masquerading as affection. They called it love, but it came with stipulations. Perform, serve, and save. Don't ask for too much. You were expected to remain available, emotionally giving and spiritually present, even when dying inwardly. And when you put a boundary or stopped being their emotional generator, they became frigid. That was not love. That was a reliance on your light. God saw it. He observed how they positioned themselves close enough to benefit while remaining far enough away to evade accountability. He noticed how they grinned in your face while draining your energy behind the scenes. And he stepped in not just to protect you, but also to deny them access to your essence. He drew you back, blocked the spiritual ports that were feeding them, and exposed the unpleasant truth. They never fell in love with you. They became addicted to your energy. They're now starving, not only emotionally, but spiritually, because your light was more than simply convenient. It was covering. You were unintentionally protecting them from the repercussions of their own spiritual degeneration. And now that you're gone, the darkness they've suppressed is devouring them from the inside out. That is why they are restless. That is why they are angry. That is why they have suddenly remembered your worth. Not because they've changed, but because they want what you no longer provide. But God has sealed the vault. You're no longer vulnerable to parasites. You are protected, and they've been exposed. Number 14. What God spared you from was nothing compared to what He is saving you for. You believed the miracle was that you lived, but that was just the first draft of the story. What God brought you out of was awful. No doubt, the betrayal, the spiritual battle, the near collapse of your mind and identity. Yes, it was intense, but it wasn't the main plot. That was only the demolition phase. God wasn't simply attempting to save you from the flames. He was building a throne amid the ashes. You were not spared only to sit in silence. You were saved to thwart hell's plan. Your survival was not the end point. It was the launch pad. He did not save you simply so you could declare, "I made it." He saved you so that you may be the living example that darkness never has the last word. You are not simply a healed person. You are a healer. Your testimony is not about sympathy. It is about power. Power to shatter generational curses, reveal the truth about misleading institutions, and enter into places you were formerly barred from with divine authority. God did not only rescue you, He anointed you. That is why everything had to come apart. Because the you that existed prior to the breakdown was incapable of carrying the splendor He was bestowing upon your life. Now, what appeared to be punishment was actually preparation. He had to tear away the illusions, expose the parasites, cut the soul ties, and show you what was not love. So when restoration occurred, it would be genuine. No more counterfeits. No more crumbs. No more spiritual charity for those who were sabotaging your future. You were never intended to be another. Almost made it. You are the one who interrupts the forecast. Your counterattack will appear inconceivable, divine, and indisputable, leaving your foes stunned. They will be disgraced. They spoke of your downfall as if it were a prophecy. However, they overlooked that God was in charge of the ultimate edit. He didn't simply save you from something. He saved you for something. And what comes next will not just heal you. It will remember every cry, every prayer, and every lonely moment. Nothing can stop your rise. What God delivered you from was nasty, deliberate, and ages in the making. It wasn't only personal. It was spiritual battle with ancient origins. God's method, however, is even more shocking than the enemy's savagery. He did not simply lift you out of the abyss. He decrypted the entire plot in front of you. He let you walk through treachery so you could spot dishonesty when it smiled. He made you know the pain of abandonment so you would stop seeking for love that cost your soul. He allowed you to watch the mask slip off, not to traumatize you, but to wake you up, because this road has never been about survival alone. It was about sovereignty. Restore your divine authority. This was not an accident or a tragic episode in a family's history. You were put into a battleground disguised as a family, a social group, a romance, or a church pew. And when others were victims of silence and compromise, you were the one who defied protocol. You awoke. You began asking questions. You called out to God, not with beautiful prayers, but with the naked, terrible reality. Heaven not only comforted, but also intervened. Indeed, the attacks were savage. Yes, they hired individuals to play roles in your demise. Yes, they attempted to transfer their karma, drain your energy, and sabotage your thoughts. However, they failed because when you united with the truth, God overturned the entire system. What was previously legal in spirit has lost its authority. What used to feed on your brightness was now starving. Your discernment broke what had previously been supported by your silence. Now the tables have turned. You're not only healing, you're dangerous. You're wandering around with keys that open cages that others had no idea they were in. You are carrying revelations not only for yourself, but for future generations. You're the reason certain curses are breaking and won't reboot. And those who used to mock you are now perplexed as to how you keep rising when you were supposed to self-destruct. So understand this. You're not the black sheep, reject, or tragedy. You are God's counterstrike. You were sent into the heart of darkness, not to blend in, but to disrupt it. Your comeback is more than just personal. It's prophetic. Every scar represents a seal. Every loss was used as leverage. Every tear represented a transaction. And in heaven's courtroom. And now your ascension is unstoppable. Your presence is disruptive. And your narrative demonstrates how God will always rewrite hell's prognosis. If this message touched you deeply, if it validated something you've always felt but couldn't express, don't keep it to yourself. Hit the subscribe button to join a community that sees you, understands you, and follows this path of purpose with clarity and passion. If you found this video to be meaningful, please like it. Leave a comment below. I want to hear your story, your opinions, your aha moments, and most importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear the truth about their struggle and triumph. You never know who is secretly fighting under the weight of a spiritual struggle they cannot identify. This could be the message that awakens them up, just like it did for you. We are not merely creating a channel. We are creating an army of awakened, selected souls. And believe me, you want to be a part of what happens next. Subscribe, like, comment, and share. Your voice, energy, and presence matter here. Let us keep climbing together. Dear viewers, your support through Super Chat and membership is the only source of income that keeps this channel running. If you want me to continue uploading valuable content without delays and to stay motivated in providing you with the best wisdom, I need your help. Every contribution, big or small, makes a huge difference. Feel free to donate and support Pure Wisdom so we can keep growing together. Your generosity keeps this journey alive.
If you're enjoying the content on Pure Wisdom and find value in the messages we share, I encourage you to subscribe. Based on the latest analytics, 93.9% of viewers are watching without subscribing. By subscribing, you not only stay updated with new content, but also support the channel's growth, allowing us to continue spreading wisdom for the chosen ones. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an important message. Let's build this community together.